This computer. Okay, so this is, there's John joining us. This is a discussion of the Great Dharani and also maybe Dharanis in general on January 7th. And we're going to start by chanting the Great Dharani together. Let's see. Share my sound. You should be able to see my screen now and see a video that says Great Compassionate Dharani on the bottom. Everybody see that?
Got it.
Yes.
And let me just do a sound check on the video, make sure you can hear it okay. Did you hear that moke talk hit? Okay, good. All right. I never know. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to play a slightly different version where the words are a little easier to see. This is hard to see with the white. I apologize for that. I've got a better one, I hope. Yeah. Oh, that's not good. That's not showing up at all. Let's see. Let's try one more. That's better.
Ima
Okay, so um, that's what we're going to talk about tonight, the Great Dharani. Now, I think it might be useful to talk about Dharanis in general, but I really want to, if if people have ideas or questions or anything you want to share or ask about the Great Dharani or Dharanis in general, um, that would be good. I did send out yeah, Justin, shoot.
Yeah, well, I think your list of questions on the email
Uh-huh.
all are interesting to me. Yeah, just generally, I'm just like, well, what does it mean? And like, there's a really powerful practice for Sun San, and just yeah, just curious to learn more.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so the question so even before asking what does a particular Dharani mean, there is the question of do Dharanis mean anything, and it's often stated. In fact, Zen Master Sung San himself told people it can't be translated. He didn't say it doesn't. I don't think he ever said it doesn't mean anything, but he did say it couldn't be translated. And you know, um, nothing can really be translated. I mean, if you as soon as you translate anything from one language to another, it doesn't mean the same thing. So he might have been technically correct, but the Great Dharani was originally in Sanskrit. Over the centuries, the Chinese it came to East Asia by way of China and then spread to Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And one of the problems is that it was so popular way back in the Tang Dynasty, like over like 1,000 years ago, that different people kept translating the same Sanskrit. So the Great Dharani comes from a sutra called the Great Dharani Sutra, and there are many of these sutras that are primarily sutras in which the Buddha just taught a particular Dharani. Okay, and so this one was so popular it was translated at least 17 different times, and and in each of the translations, the Dharani was spelled out differently in Chinese characters, and so what happened was that over the centuries, one of those versions was the one that was adopted by the Korean Buddhists, and another one was the version that was adopted by everybody else. And so the one that was adopted by everybody else, there is a reasonably good translation of it. The one that was adopted by the Koreans, there isn't a good translation of it that I've ever seen. But there's a lot of it that you can make out. Um, but and usually when people do Dharanis or mantras, they're not they're often not particularly focused on the meaning. Although I do want to show several examples of Dharanis that clearly do have meanings. One of the problems with the Great Dharani is that it has been so popular over the centuries. The vast majority of people who chant it don't know Sanskrit. And so if a Dharani is only known by people who are relatively well educated Buddhists who may have a little knowledge of Sanskrit, or who have some access to experts or whatever, then those Dharanis can remain a little bit more close to the original Sanskrit. But once they get out into the wild and people who can't read and write Chinese, even right, people who are just illiterate even in their own native language, and who don't know anything about Sanskrit, they just learn this Dharani and they chant it, and people learn it from other people who and actually a lot, even people who are Buddhist monks and nuns and priests in China are not always that well educated, and usually they do not know Sanskrit either. Even people who are proper, they often have like a minimum amount of education, even in reading and writing Chinese. So yeah, the people who've been chanting it, they don't know Sanskrit, and so over the centuries, it's like the telephone game, you know? If you ever played the telephone game where by the time it makes it around the circle, the message has changed quite a bit. And so, but actually the Koreans are actually very into Sanskrit and have done a better job of, anyway. So the the short answer as far as the meaning goes is that it definitely does mean something. Every syllable of the Great Dharani is either a Sanskrit word or part of a Sanskrit word, or and some of them are seed syllables or bija syllables or whatever, like Om or Sabaha. So there are some things in there that are, and those still have meaning. They don't translate into, but most of it is actual words in Sanskrit that have become somewhat garbled over the centuries, and no one has. And so the form of the Great Dharani that everybody chants in China and Japan, Vietnam, that one has been, people have kind of pieced together what the original Sanskrit was and then have translated it from the Sanskrit. So we know that. And that's what if you see D.T. Suzuki's translation, which is usually considered not to be very good, but he was the first person who ever tried to translate it into English. So it was a start. It was a good start. Anyway, and I don't know. Your question, or what you said, Justin, was pretty wide open. I don't want to go on and on. If you want to say something more specific, or if anybody else wants to jump in with something that you're curious about, or what, Justin, I don't want to cut you off. You want to say something?
Yeah, just like if I was gonna explain it to someone who's like going on their first
Ah,
day-long
mm-hmm,
retreat and they're about to do the
mm-hmm,
Great Dharani, they're like, "What the heck is the Great Dharani?"
mm-hmm.
Um, but I guess, yeah, like
Yeah,
what would be
right.
a concise explanation of it?
Mm-hmm. Uh, it right. Let me actually use a slide that I prepared. Um, yeah, I don't want to. Hello, Wesley. Uh, I'm going to bring
Hello.
this in. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Share my screen. Share sound. All right. Oops. Better put it back up there. Put this down. Okay. So this is serious questions about Dharanis in general. And so the answer, if somebody asked, someone was coming to a retreat or even just coming to practice, at a time, because often when people come together to practice together, even if it's not a retreat, the Great Dharani is often, even when minimal chanting is done in many groups, they will just do the Heart Sutra in English and the Great Dharani as kind of a minimal chanting practice as part of a group getting together. Here, a Dharani or a mantra is a practice that was taught by, or that has been taught by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The practice consists of repeating a string of syllables. I love editing PowerPoint slides in real time, over and over again. And so the Buddha taught this quite a lot in his teachings. He would give his students. It's a verbal practice, or a practice that one does with speech. That in Buddhism often speaks in terms of body, speech, and mind. In fact, the Eightfold Path can be broken up into parts that are specifically for. There's one of the Eightfold Path is specifically for speech. Many of them are specifically for the body. They're physical actions like right work, you know, right livelihood. I mean, and speech is kind of midway between thinking and physically acting. And so it's often considered to be a good place to put your to have your practice in. And so the Buddha taught this kind of practice. Chanting, you can call it chanting practice, you can call it dharani practice, you can call it mantra practice. So chanting the Great Dharani is not that much different from chanting the Heart Sutra, especially when we do the Heart Sutra in the Korean version, which one doesn't necessarily understand, although that's more easily it exists. It's just a kind of practice that we do with our mouth, and one of the reasons why that's so important is because we what we say is often very powerful and often not so good. We can create a lot of negative karma with our speech. And one of the best ways to create positive karma with our speech is to engage in dharani practice, mantra practice, chanting practice, because there we are doing the most basic kind of Buddhist practice, which is doing something that the Buddha has taught us to do. When we meditate, the Buddha taught people to meditate, sit in meditation. People bow, the Buddha taught people to bow. And when we chant, we're doing, again, another kind of practice that the Buddha taught. You should probably make it a little bit more condensed than that, though, Justin. If somebody asks you, just say, you could say this is a practice that the Buddha taught, of how to learn how to better use our speech.
This one is specifically related to like you were saying with the Eightfold Path. So like just like there's a mantra or a dharani for right livelihood, like this is one associated with right speech.
I don't think that there are mantras associated. Well, there may very well be, not that I know of, but the what the Great Dharani is associated with is compassion. So it's often referred to as the Great Compassionate Dharani, and the main purpose of chanting the Great Dharani is to cultivate it. So it's actually, the Dharani was actually taught not directly by the Buddha, but by Avalokitesvara, and it is a way of strengthening our connection with Avalokitesvara. And of course, Avalokitesvara, or Kwanseum Bosal, is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So in following the teaching of Kwanseum Bosal, which part of her teaching is the Great Dharani, we are following her, and she is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So it's a way of so the Buddhist teaching that the Great Dharani is most closely associated with is just the teaching of compassion. It's one thing to think, oh, I should be compassionate, or to have the aspiration to be compassionate. How do you do that? And one way of doing that is by chanting the Great Dharani. And also, so a lot of people view the compassionate aspect of the Great Dharani in a slightly different way, and they see, and this is a perfectly legitimate way of looking at it, when we feel in trouble, or we have a problem, or we face difficulty in our lives, it's very common for Buddhists to, it's a way of praying, although a lot of people don't like the word pray, but that's depending upon who you're talking to. You're praying to Kwanseum Bosal, and Kwanseum Bosal as the Kwanseum Bosal, that is Avalokitesvara, as the Bodhisattva of compassion, is a good Bodhisattva to call upon, because she has promised to always respond to those who call upon her by name or by chanting one of the mantras or dharanis that she's taught. Let's see. I can stop sharing this now.
Yeah, and I was just talking the other day with someone about, yeah, like chanting Coca-Cola, because I know that was like I kind of get passed down. I'm like, yeah, just chant Coca-Cola, chant Coca-Cola, and it's a mantra practice. So I see on there that's just like definitively no. Um, and so I'm curious, what makes you say that?
Well, the Buddha didn't teach that mantra. So there there are there are non-Buddhist mantras. There are wonderful mantras that I use as part of my practice that are not part of Buddhism, but they come from the Hindu tradition. The Gayatri mantra is a very famous Hindu mantra that I really love to chant. There's a very long chant called the Hanuman Chalisa. It takes about 7 minutes to do. It's like a song. It's beautiful. It's a really powerful practice, and I really appreciate those. But those are also those are from the Hindu tradition. Those are mantras and dharanis that were taught by the goddesses and gods of Hinduism. They're not just things that are made up, or they're not just things that people kind of pluck out of the air. Now, Zen Master Sung San did at one time, when he was making a point, say that if you single-mindedly repeat Coca-Cola, then that is a mantra. And the problem is that there's a kind of a trick with words there. If you single-mindedly, to be truly single-minded is another way of saying enlightened. So, and then what anything that an enlightened being says is a mantra. And that's where mantras come from. Mantras come from great Buddhas and great Bodhisattvas who have given us these practices to do. And so if you are completely sincere and single-minded, that means that you are enlightened. And therefore, if you say Coca-Cola in that state of enlightenment, then it could be seen as a mantra. You have to be careful with Zen masters are very tricky. You have to be very careful with what they say. And one of the reasons why you can tell that Zen Master Sung San didn't actually mean that Coca-Cola is a mantra is because he taught lots of mantras. He never taught anybody to chant Coca-Cola as a mantra. He taught all kinds of mantras. There's pages and pages of in students collected together the different mantras that he taught and the little explanations that he would give, and none of them are Coca-Cola. They're all traditional Buddhist mantras that come from sutras, or they come from traditional Buddhist sources. Yeah. So I can and I also said on that list of answers that I gave, I also said please don't accept any of these answers uncritically. So if you think Coca-Cola is a mantra, it is important to know that mantras, where they come from, mantras and dharanis, they do come from sutras. So some sutras are just for teaching one particular mantra or dharani, like the Great Dharani Sutra. There's another very, very, very popular dharani or in East Asia called the most people it's like more popular than the Great Dharani actually. There's even dance remix versions of it. It's like really wildly popular in East Asia.
Yeah.
It's the Dharani of the 11 Headed Avalokitesvara, and it's kind of like the short version of the Great Dharani. In fact, I can let me see. I'm not going to show the video. Let me get the, oh yeah. I think you should be able to hear this. This is the dance remix version of the Dharani of the 11 Headed Avalokitesvara. Can you hear that? The beat? Okay. Oh, I'm not sharing my sound. That's right. Never mind. Here we go. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can actually show the words and share the sound. Okay. Oh, here it is. This is the yeah. So you can see this now, the Dharani of the 11 Headed Avalokitesvara, right? And now you'll be able to hear the dance remix version. You hear that now? It's actually, what's that?
Catchy.
It is. Oh, it's very, very popular, and you can find YouTube videos. Actually, you can, once you start looking for it, you can find lots of YouTube videos of people who are just lip syncing it, making videos of themselves chanting it. So how did I get talking about the 11 headed? Well, it's like the short version of the Great Dharani, and it is an example of a Dharani where we can translate it word for word. Homage to the triple gem, homage to the ocean of noble wisdom, the luminous one, to the king of manifestations, etc., etc. It's Sanskrit, and you can just translate it word for word. But people don't. The vast majority of the people who recite it and chant it don't know Sanskrit. They may be aware of what of the translation, but when they're reciting it, they're singing it like a song, basically. Another good example is the Dharani of the Medicine Buddha, which again can be it's fairly easy to translate it word for word from Sanskrit. And often people just recite the last part, and often they do it with the Tibetan version that is slightly different, but it's just Om Bekanse, Maha Bekanse, Radha Samagate Soha, which roughly it's not exactly the same as this, but it's more or less the ending part of the Medicine Buddha Dharani. As is known in the Chinese and Korean and Japanese and Vietnamese version. And then, oh yeah, one other. So if you do Kwanseum Bosal chanting, which is a practice where we recite the name of Kwanseum Bosal over and over and over again, we also recite several mantras and dharanis as part of that chant. And this is one of them. And this is another one that. So this is the Dharani that goes Namu Samada Motanam Abara Jihadasa Sananam Danyata Om Kakakai Kai Hum Hum Abara Abara Bara Abara Bara Abara Jita Jita Jiri Jiri Para Para Sanjika Shirie Sabaha. So if you have done Kwanseum Bosal chanting before, you probably recognize that. And D.T. Suzuki also translated that one. It's also very popular in fact, I can play. I have the, oh yeah, this is the Japanese version. Oops. Again, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, I'm still sharing. You heard that bell, right?
Yep.
Okay, let me just play this.
Shosaimyo Kichijo Dharani Namo Sambandha Motoram Noharashi Kotosha Sonona Toshi Toen Gyaki Gyaki Unru Shura, Chishusa, Chishusa, Chishuri, Chishuri, Sohaja, Sohaja, Senchi, Gashirie, Somoko.
Yeah. So the Japanese pronunciation of dharanis is often very different from the Korean pronunciation, but usually they're actually saying the same thing, just with a different pronunciation. They're actually saying the same Sanskrit. So the Sanskrit syllables were transliterated into Chinese characters, and then the Japanese have one way of pronouncing those Chinese characters, and Koreans have a different way, and Vietnamese have a different way, and of course Chinese speakers have their own way of pronouncing them. Tom, I saw you unmuted. I've been yakking for a while now. Did you have something you want to bring in or talk
I
about?
did. I want to refer back to the slide that you put up.
Okay.
And you were talking about the source of dharanis and mantras.
Okay. This
all
one?
being, I'm sorry?
This slide that I put up now? Should be able to see it now.
Not seeing the slide.
Let me see. Okay, well, go ahead with what you're going to say.
Yeah, so you talked about the origin of dharanis and mantras being in the sutras. And you said with some exceptions in those, and the exception was then it would be truly esoteric. And I mean, I know the meaning of esoteric, but can you speak to that a little bit and maybe an example of what that would be?
Oh, well, so if it was truly esoteric and I actually knew an esoteric mantra, I couldn't tell you. I mean, that's part of the deal in esoteric Buddhism, is that it's literally secret and held secret and is only given to people in the process of be given some sort of an initiation. So so I can talk about I've received, for the most part, and I have received some esoteric initiations in my practices over the years. I get around, but usually, even in esoteric practices, the mantras that are used are exoteric, and there's so anyone can still do them. Like one of my favorite. Let's see if I can even think of it now. I haven't done it for quite a while. Yeah, there are some Tara mantras that I know that are a little different. So people generally know the Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha mantra. I know a couple of other Tara mantras that were taught to me by Tibetan teachers, but that are not esoteric. But they can be included as part of an esoteric practice. But and so one kind of interesting example of this is the medicine Buddha Dharani, which we were talking about. This is you can see this, right? I don't know if my screen sharing is working properly or not. Can everybody see the medicine Buddha Dharani slide right now? Yeah, okay, good. So this Dharani is usually considered to come from, I can't remember which translator. It was either Xuanzang or Kumarajiva, okay? And you can actually go and find because not everything is online, but a lot of things are online now. And you can find the Chinese translations of the Medicine Buddha Sutra. And the original Chinese translations of the Medicine Buddha Sutra do not include the Dharani. Over the centuries, and so I don't know if at first it was being kept a secret, but now it's always included. And it's so I think one possible explanation is that originally that Dharani was an esoteric practice. People could read the Medicine Buddha Sutra, but then but they just leave out the part where it actually describes the Medicine Buddha's enlightenment, where he received this dharani, or actually he didn't receive the dharani, he uttered the dharani as a direct expression of his enlightenment at the moment when he became enlightened. And that's left out of the earliest exoteric versions of the sutra. But for whatever reason, the dharanis became, it's like a lot of people know the answer to the koan, the sound of one hand. I'm not going to say it or show it, but it is often considered to be permissible to show people the answer to that koan because it's so widely known, because it's gotten out into the wild. And so that may have been what happened with this particular. This might be a case where originally this dharani was genuinely esoteric, meaning not available to the general public, but then became exoteric because because too many people found out what it was and were practicing it anyway. And also, dharanis and mantras tend to be very, very popular. Sometimes people think of dharanis and mantras as very advanced practices or difficult practices. Actually, they're like the easiest kind of practice that there is, which is why I like them so much. In Theravada Buddhism, people often don't think of. Now I'm looking at. Mantras and dharanis are found in many sutras, so they are teachings of the Buddha. In the Pali Canon, there are many examples of parittas, which are in essence dharanis. So paritta is a Pali word for protection. And the Buddha taught many, so there are many sutras that are chanted in the Pali tradition, essentially as dharanis. The Metta Sutra, for one, is chanted as a protective, some people would even say as a protective spell, although I think most people prefer not to use the word spell as in magic spell in association with Buddhism. Another really good one is the now I can't even remember it. Anyway, but there's a very short one that the Buddha taught to Angulimala, one of the Buddha's more famous disciples. And Angulimala one time came upon a woman who was dying in childbirth, and he didn't know what to do. So he ran to the Buddha and he said, please, help me. What can I do to help this woman? And the Buddha gave him a very short Pali phrase, which is, it basically means, I have, so Angulimala was a killer before he became the Buddha's disciple. And when he became a disciple of the Buddha, he took a very absolute vow of nonviolence. Not just to try not to harm others, but almost to the extent of like a Jain. I mean, he took a really, really serious vow of nonviolence. And so the phrase in Pali that the Buddha taught to Angulimala was, basically, through the power of my vow of nonviolence, I will protect you. And so to this day, not only in Theravada Buddhist countries, but throughout the Buddhist world, women in childbirth often use this mantra, although it's usually not called a mantra. And technically in Theravada Buddhism, it's called a paritta. But the reason why I started talking about this is that by far the most common practice for lay people in Theravada Buddhism is Paritta Chanting, which is very much like the chanting that we do. So when we chant the Heart Sutra is a teaching given by it's called the Heart Sutra, right? Because it's a teaching given by the Buddha. When we chant, when we chant the other things we chant, they are either the words of the Buddha contained in the sutras, or some chants are kind of distilled summaries or explanations of Buddhist teachings that have been given by, very advanced teachers, like not the Four Noble Truths, the Four Great Vows comes from a very great teacher, Ji Yi, who wrote it down. It's based upon teachings that are found in many sutras, but the exact phrasing is not found in a sutra. And it really caught on. Four great vows. People are still saying it today. Anyway, yeah, Justin, you were going to say something. Looks like.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like looking at the questions and just kind of
Uh-huh.
looking at it for me. I guess what I'm trying
Uh-huh.
to figure out is like, how does Dharani or sutra practice like help me, like, and help me benefit others and benefit, and like, how does it fit into my practice? 'Cause I just thought like sutras and mantras were kind of a weird thing that people didn't actually do. We just talked
Oh,
about before recently.
the,
Um,
a weird thing. What that people? What? So, say
it
that
just
again.
seemed like such a like I didn't see him talk about mantras in the scientific literature on meditation, and so
Oh,
it's
right.
new
Yeah.
to me when I like dove into Zen. Um, and so yeah, I
Right.
guess like if I'm going to, let's say I'm going to take up the Great Dharani as a practice,
Hmm.
like I guess it seems necessary to kind of like know what it's saying and like kind of think about the meaning of the words versus going in on it as just like a one-mindedly kind of
Yeah.
concentration practice. Just kind of seeing why
Hmm.
and how it helps, I guess.
Yeah. Now, so, and I think uh, it's not only is it reasonable to want to know what something means if you're going to be saying it, you should want to know. Now, Zen Master Sung San wasn't big on explanations. Okay, he just wasn't. That wasn't his style, and it was a very he had a his style was just do it. So I don't believe that he understood the Great Dharani when he chanted it for 100 days on his famous 100-day retreat when he attained his great awakening, which all of his teaching then for the rest of his life came from that experience. I'm relatively certain he didn't understand. He was taught that Dharani by someone who said there's a very special retreat that you can do, and you chant this Dharani all day for 20 hours a day. You can sleep for 4 hours a night. You have to live in a remote location. You can only eat pine needles and you can only drink water from a stream. And if you do that for 100 days, you will either die or go insane or become enlightened. And we know that he didn't die. So, and so that's the way he taught it. He taught it. So his teaching of the Great Dharani was true to his own experience. His own experience was not based upon any meaning behind the Dharani. It was based upon just do it, just doing it, and that's perfectly legitimate, I think. And especially if you get some great, wonderful benefit from it, which he did. So, but I think it's also perfectly legitimate to want to know what it is that you're chanting. And so, a good example of a mantra like that is the Kanzeon chant. The Kanzeon chant, which not only is it relatively easy to translate word for word, but we also have a good idea from Zen Master Hakuin what its purpose is, what its direction is. And the direction of the Kanzeon chant, the Kanzeon Namu Butsu Yobutsu Uen Yobutsu Uen Bupo Soen Jo Rakuga Jo Chonin Kanzeon Bonen Kanzeon Nenen Jushinki Nenen Fudishin. Hakuin is very clear. The purpose of chanting the Kanzeon chant is to cultivate bodhicitta, cultivate the aspiration to save all beings, for which you must become enlightened. In order to truly save all beings, the only way you'll ever be able to do that. It's hard enough to save yourself the way we are right now. And so that's a wonderful one to do, and you can see the meaning, and you can read what Hakuin had to say about it and the importance of it. He's one of the most important people for. You can also talk to Zen Master Daegak about it, because Zen Master Daegak has done something really quite remarkable in taking a chant that is primarily associated with the Japanese Buddhist tradition, although it's originally Chinese, but he's incorporated it into our practice, which is primarily comes from the Korean Buddhist tradition. And so you can ask him why. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, and if you're interested in doing that kind of practice, yeah. And there's this other one, the 11-headed Avalokitesvara Dharani is another one. You can and it is widely, the word for word translation is widely available. And again, it's another one that the direction of that is the cultivation of Bodhi mind, or the awakening mind, or bodhicitta in the original Sanskrit, which is this, which is the same thing that the four great vows are talking about, saving all beings.
Just so
And the 11-headed Avalokitesvara mantra also has the advantage of having a dance remix version that's very catchy. Sorry.
Yeah. Just so fascinating that, yeah, you could take this Dharani and possibly not even know the meaning of it, and yeah, stay with it for that long. It's just, yeah, really interesting, and kind of shakes my mind about it up of
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, what's the function of it? What does it
Mm-hmm.
serve? And what, yeah, I guess I'm looking at like, well, what is my intention when I do a
Mm-hmm.
Dharani practice? Um, yeah, just a good alternative perspective. Love it.
So this may not be directly related to the Dharani or Dharanis in general, but you were talking about Seung San and his practice, and yeah, I've read so if you um, only, only don't know, if you read
Mm-hmm.
only don't
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or anything else he wrote, but
Mm-hmm.
only don't know says it a lot. He just says, just do it, and only go straight and just do it. But I'm wondering if that just do it. One of the one of the one of the pieces of advice I've heard, right, that's commonly out there, is if you what should you do? You aren't enlightened. What should you do?
Yeah.
And the answer
Uh-huh.
that I got there is just act like you're enlightened. Behave as if you're enlightened. So is that what he's saying with just do it?
Well, actually, going back to the fact that Dharanis and mantras and parittas in the Theravada tradition come directly from the Buddha. And we are, when we recite these, we are saying the speech of the Buddha. And so in a sense, that's what we're doing. When you sit down in meditation, we're doing what the Buddha did when he became enlightened, when he sat under the Bodhi tree. So in Soto Zen, they go so far as to call it practice enlightenment, which is not practicing to become enlightened, it's practice enlightenment. And although at the same time, one should probably remember that you're not enlightened. Um, there will be signs that will tell you that you are not enlightened. Um, so pretending to be enlightened is exactly right, unless you convince yourself that you are enlightened when you're not, and that happens. Oh, that's very common. That's one of the problems that can happen in Zen or in any kind of spiritual practice, but I think Zen is especially susceptible to it. A lot of Zen people running around pretending to be enlightened. But if you're pretending to be enlightened and you're always doing things that are beneficial to others and never harming anyone, then you're doing a very good job of pretending to be enlightened. But that's a word. I can't do that. But actually, the Dalai Lama calls that. What does he call it? One of his pieces of advice is every morning get up and say, today I am only going to perform actions that are beneficial to others, and I am not going to perform any actions that are harmful to others. And he says, even though you will not only perform actions that are beneficial to others, and you will perform actions that are harmful to others, you should have that intention, have that aspiration, and you should train your mind to want that. And if you don't succeed, you should never give up. So that's good advice, and that's kind of what we do. When we chant, we never chant perfectly. When we sit, we never sit perfectly. If you do bowing practice, you never bow perfectly. If you try to be compassionate, we're never perfectly compassionate. If we try to cultivate patience, a big thing that I work on, never get patience perfect or even close to it. But I try not to give up.
Love that.
And being aware that you're pretending is interesting to look at. When you're doing that. I mean, you should look at that. I think. How does that count? But really, it's all we can. In some ways, it's really all we're capable of at this point. You put it really perfectly, Tom, when you said, I think you were the one who said it. Oh, we're not enlightened, so what can we do? And that's the whole point. Sometimes teachings are presented in a little bit too extreme of a way where only. It's like the teaching, if you single-mindedly chant Coca-Cola, then it is a mantra. Well, it's true, but our minds are never fully. That's pure samadhi, So what about if you're not single-minded, then you should chant legitimate mantras and dharanis that were taught by the Buddha. So at least you know that the things that your mouth is saying are good.
Yeah. Because part of it is I just gotta take the Great Dharani and just use it for a while, try it out for a handful of months or a year and just see what happens.
You really can't go wrong with that, but at the same time, I mean it's a great practice, and it's one of the benefits of doing the Great Dharani is long enough and a little bit kind of difficult enough to make the sounds that it's a really good training for the mind to learn it, to actually learn it by heart, and it's an interesting experience to go through. It takes, basically what it takes is repeating it a lot. And the more you repeat it, it's not so much the amount of time, but it is time in terms of how many times you repeat it. The more times you repeat it, which of course takes time to do, but eventually it becomes part of your, it moves from up here where you have to think about it while you're doing it to back here where it becomes, very deep in your brain, and or your mouth is learning. I mean, your mouth, it gets to the point where it does it automatically. Anyway, that's a very interesting training process to go through, but it takes some commitment, and it's easy to, it's easy to say, why am I doing this? This is crazy. I'm going to stop.
Another good training for my mind, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, I need to hop off. Appreciate everyone.
Okay. All right. So we are at 8 o'clock now. So I also have to hop off. Thanks everybody for coming. Let's see. We started with the Great Dharani. Let's just go out with oh no, it's right here. I mentioned the four great vows, of course. Why is it not here? Of course I can't find it. Huh.
I think we got it even without a recording. I think we got it.
Sure. Well, so I do it a little bit differently than the way Zen Master Dekak does it, but everybody do it your own way. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. So thanks for coming. And there's lots more to say about the Great Dharani. So we'll continue on in a month from now. And next Tuesday night, we'll just get together and chant. Instead of talking about chanting, we will chant. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.